What matters most to your employees? Can you measure their happiness? People are the lifeblood of your business, and Glint helps you understand how they're feeling. It all starts when you ask questions. Questions that uncover insights about your people. And the more you ask, the more you learn. Feedback fuels insights. Insights power action. Now you can gain a true understanding of your employees, guiding you toward a workplace where people can be happier and more successful. Because when your people succeed, your organization succeeds. Ready to reimagine your business with your people at the center?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2020 Virtual People Success Summit. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Katie Farrow. I'm the head of storytelling at Glint, and I will once again be your MC and your virtual Sherpa for this week. Before we kick things off, I want to reflect on a key theme of people success, one that's foundational to our ability to be successful and is very basic to the concept itself. And that's the idea of leaning into the employee voice. One of the most common hurdles we hear from our customers is the propensity when things get really, really rough to not ask employees how they're doing. When they're going through a merger and acquisition, maybe a downsizing exercise, or even a leadership transition, the natural instinct is to lean away. But as we've learned in the last 24 hours, for many organizations, including probably your own, COVID has been different. I mentioned yesterday that the average number of pulses that our customers are engaging with on an annual basis has increased from 3 to 7 in the last several months. And some customers are taking it even further. In her keynote yesterday, Mala, the Chief People Officer of EA, referenced the company's always-on COVID pulse, allowing employees around the world to leave feedback anytime they want. You'll hear similar stories today of organizations throwing open the doors to feedback, welcoming the employee voice, and challenging and encouraging managers and leaders to respond quickly in small, concrete ways that are meaningful to their people. I know many of you at home have had this experience over the last couple months as well. For many of the companies you're hearing from this week, and surely from your own as well, this was not the plan. They were going about this in ways that were methodical, with a timeline and a process and stakeholders and the whole shebang. But obviously life threw a wrench in those plans. They had to adjust, sometimes on a day's notice, sometimes an hour's notice. But what we also touched on yesterday, even as employees are sharing how they feel, and how they feel isn't always great, and in some cases, it's getting worse, they're also expressing gratitude for simply being asked. This gratitude and this recognition that their voices are heard and responded to has been a source of energy for these organizations that have really gone for it. The feedback from employees has been an upswell of perspectives and advice about how the organization can support them even better. These voices are a guide to leadership, giving them the real-time insight they desperately need into what's working, what's not working, and how the organization should think about the workplace of the future. That's why this term that we've come to love so much at Glint over the past couple of months has a double meaning. Thank you for asking is a common response from employees these days. Like Lori from Bristol Myers Squibb said yesterday, one of the major themes in comments over the last couple of months has been one of gratitude and pride. Our employees are proud to work in an organization that's so committed to their well-being, and that's also committed to asking them to be a part of the solution. But thank you for asking also applies to leaders. They're grateful that the company, through your work, has asked employees what they can do to help. That's why many of you have expressed to me and over the last couple of days that you're the most popular person in the virtual office. This data has become a goldmine, especially in times of change. It's a moment of confidence in a landscape that's been defined by anxiety and uncertainty. I'm so glad you're here again today to continue your people success journey with us, to continue to learn from one another, and to provide even more value and confidence to your leaders, your managers, and your people. The work you do is so important. So thank you for being here. So let's get into it. Today, we'll continue our main sessions with a fireside chat from LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, Twyla Hansen, followed by interactive sessions on the other two pillars of people success, effectively implementing change and measuring and expanding on progress. We'll wrap with an Ask the Experts panel featuring a number of our bravest people science consultants. And tomorrow will be the region and topic specific breakout sessions, as well as our Glint customer breakout session. Remember, you can find which sessions you're registered for in your personalized agenda in the attendee hub. And as a reminder, please continue to ask questions of our speakers in the Q&A box below, and look for more resources in the resources tab above. If you miss a session or would like to go back and learn more, you can rewatch sessions by going to the All Sessions tab and clicking on the session you're interested in. So now I'm excited to be introducing two incredible women for our first session today, Glint People Science Leader Amy Lavoie and LinkedIn's Chief People Officer Twyla Hansen. Enjoy.
Thanks, Katie. I am so excited for today's session. I will be joined by LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, Twyla Hansen, who leads the team responsible for hiring, developing top talent, including all benefits, employee experience, and diversity, inclusion, and belonging. No small feat. Hi, Twyla. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Amy. I'm excited to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. So before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you're working on at LinkedIn, and one thing we would not find on your LinkedIn profile?
Okay, I'll start with the one thing that you can't find on my LinkedIn profile is for years, my family and I have taken a week during the summer to go to a very, very remote off-the-grid campsite, which has been not the highlight of my vacation because it involves a ton of dirt and hot weather and mosquitoes. But this year we went, during the pandemic, and it was the most glorious week. It was nice to unplug. It was also, we're so off the grid that you could kind of forget that we were in a pandemic because we were in such an isolated location. So it was actually the first year that I actually, appreciated being so remote and off the grid and just, having time to just be present with my family. So that's one thing that's not on my LinkedIn profile. Let's see about me. I am, first and foremost, a mom of two teenage boys. I have a 17-year-old senior and a 14-year-old freshman. And, I think about them. They're both in boarding schools. So I think about them and how they're doing, how they're thriving in this environment all the time. I also am a wife, also a chief people officer of LinkedIn. And I've been at LinkedIn for 5 months now. It has been an intense, wild, but absolutely thoroughly enjoyable 5 months. And currently what we're working on is our global talent organization strategy. So that's sort of what I'm in the middle of right now. I've spent the last 5 months listening a ton, meeting with a ton of leaders, individual contributors, really trying to understand the value of the talent organization to LinkedIn. And I've been spending several sessions with the leadership team, taking this information and really mapping out what do we need, how do we need to organize ourselves, and what services do we need to provide to LinkedIn in the future so that we could help LinkedIn grow and thrive. So that work is a lot of fun. It's also hard work when you're thinking through prioritization and what matters most and what direction the organization is going and how to make sure that we have a really strong backbone in the talent organization. So that's a little bit about myself. Oh, also, I am a dog parent. Pandemic, we have a pandemic puppy. Her name is Mulligan, and we adopted her, rescued her back in April. So, during the pandemic, I've been spending a lot of time watching YouTube videos and learning how to train her.
Oh, that is wonderful. What kind of breed is Mulligan?
We're not exactly sure. But we believe that she's a Snorky, which is a mix between a mini Schnauzer and a Yorkie.
Oh my goodness, so cute. I'm loving all of the pandemic pups in our neighborhood. And we have a rescue as well. And whenever anyone asks that question, we just say he's 100% awesome. That's all we got. All right, wonderful. So in the same light of something we would not find on your LinkedIn profile, what are you reading or listening to these days? Is there a book or a podcast that you're loving, and why?
Yeah, so I'm currently reading Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk book. I'm kind of halfway through, and it's been really nice. He has such a great story. Where he lived for years in an ashram as a monk, and sort of bringing his learnings to the mainstream world. So I'm excited to hopefully I'll be able to finish that book in the next few days. And the top podcast that I always try to catch is Brene Brown's Unlocking Us. I feel like she has such a beautiful and simple way of providing like real-time coaching. Sort of the topics are spot on. Her way of getting to a place of vulnerability and growth, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's, such a great podcast. So, that's what's filling my free time right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I love Brene Brown and Unlocking Us. I feel like, I know she started recording that before the pandemic, but it felt like that was like such a gift to us during the pandemic. Like we all needed a little more Brene Brown in our lives. And actually, she has this one quote that has been so present for me throughout all of this. And she says, "Be awkward, brave, and kind." And I keep coming back to that one. It feels so relevant for people leaders right now. Like there's a lot of awkwardness, but if we approach that with bravery and we challenge our leaders and organizations to be better, and then we keep, compassion and people at the center, that we can get through this and we can have a profound impact. But yeah, the awkwardness is a good reminder for me. It just feels really, really relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing. So our audience here today has come together around this unique concept we talk a lot about at Glint called people success, which we define as bringing your best self to work to do your best work. I know that this has actually been an important element in your career, including your last role prior to LinkedIn. Can you tell me about your journey with people success and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, I actually had the title of, Vice President of People Success and Inclusion at the San Francisco Fed. And to give you a little bit of insight around, that title, essentially I was leading the HR function and the inclusion and diversity function. But we were really intentional at the Fed around trying to implement a cultural shift. We were going through a cultural transformation at the San Francisco Fed where we wanted to be very intentional around being clear that the role of human resource wasn't just to ensure that, payroll was going out on time, or that we were going to, harass people around, did you get your performance ratings in? But it was really around an experience that we intentionally wanted to make sure that every employee within the organization knew that there was a function that was absolutely dedicated to ensure that employees were set up for success, that we were creating programs, we were investing in initiatives and activities to ensure that we had an organization that was thriving and able to do their best work. So that's sort of, the story. And we thought, what a better way to signal a cultural transformation than to, sort of redefine the value proposition for the organization through our naming conventions. And so, with that came a lot of responsibility around like, okay, so you've changed your name, like show us what that means. And we did a lot of investment around, changing our performance rating structure, introducing new behaviors and competencies into the organization, ensuring to our employees that we trusted them by removing, heavy burdened, multiple pages of rule books, and replaced it with, values around trust and decision making, and empowering both employees and managers to do the right thing for the organization. So it was a lot of fun to be able to provide that mindset and that, sort of help lead in that cultural transformation to the organization. But I think there's just, a ton of alignment, behind, what Glint is, how Glint thinks about people success, and my journey with, building a people success team.
That is so cool. It's so cool. We always talk about that words really matter, and that you can really start to shift mindsets by using different words. It's so cool and bold, brave, and to do that. Thanks for sharing that. So if anyone is doing the math, when Twyla introduced herself about when she started at LinkedIn, you probably gathered that Twyla, you started at LinkedIn in the middle of a pandemic, with a large part of the LinkedIn workforce remote. So what have you, as a chief people officer, learned during this pandemic about the employee experience, and how do you think that this pandemic will shape how we reimagine people's success in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. This is such an important question. So I was very fortunate when I started in June at LinkedIn. My leadership team was able to immediately give me our employee voice survey results, and so I immediately had information about the current sentiment of our employees. So shortly, which preceded me, but shortly after the pandemic started, the team thought that, it really made sense to increase the employee voice survey pulse so we could understand how our employees were feeling. And, what I understood is that our employees, I think like, many other organizations, they felt burnt out. They had difficulty managing boundaries between life and work. I think, not having a commute, not having those moments to ramp up. Several people were waking up, taking a shower, turning on their computer, and, life just became very truncated in that regard. And, people felt insecure about the future, what was happening in the environment, insecure about jobs and career progression. So that was really important and very helpful that we had that information. And then also within the Global Talent Organization, we had, it's still going on, this wonderful pilot between the Glint and Microsoft workforce analytic teams, really helping us think through how can we deeply understand what was happening in regards to wellness, how people were working, and how people are collaborating since the pandemic. And the results were like quite stark and really interesting. Not only were we able to confirm that people were indeed working longer hours, but that their days were really full of meetings, and really trying to understand that, like, what was happening there. Was it because people were feeling like the lack of connection with going into the office and wanting to meet more, or needing to work more because they didn't have the informal interactions to have a quick 30-second chat or catch up, and instead were scheduling 15-30-minute meetings. We were also, what was really insightful for us is that we were able to identify various personas of individuals within the talent organization, and really pinpoint who are the people who are thriving, who are the people who we see they have good wellness scores, good belonging scores, and what can we learn in regards to their pattern of work. And that was really insightful. So we learned that employees who are truly thriving in this environment were able to somehow, and I need to learn this, cap their meetings to 3 hours a day on average, so 15 hours a week being in meetings. They were also able to have up to 5 hours of like dedicated focus time. So that also included, like, they were emailing during that time. They were also, on Teams chatting, using collaboration tools, but they weren't distracted or disrupted by having to shift in going in and out of meetings. Also, an important insight is that employees were able to limit their after hours time to just about 40 minutes after hours. So you weren't seeing that, email traffic or chatting traffic was going into, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. They were really able to cap it to just about 40 minutes. So, that was a really good indication that they were able to shut off, really have some downtime, and really be able to take care of themselves or their families, or, just have some time to themselves. So that was it's hugely valuable information for us to understand that data and figure out ways of how to replicate it and scale it across a larger group of employees.
Oh, that's so interesting. It has been, as we've started to do more and more of integrating Glint data, which we would kind of refer to as the data that indicates how people feel, with Microsoft Workplace Analytics data, which is more about how they behave. Putting those two things together and being able to say, really, like, it helps you just have such a deeper understanding. And I think it's fascinating. For example, the 40 minutes, kind of capping that extra time at 40 minutes. It's not saying that people need these really strict boundaries. Like, they're okay if there's a little bit of bleeding in, but there needs to be a limit to that, and you just understand a nuance in a different way. And I think sometimes, without looking at those two things together, you can kind of run off, and you could think there's a problem and there isn't a problem, or the flip of that, you may not realize that there's an underlying thing. That is just really, really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The second part of your question was in regards to the future. I'll spend a couple of moments explaining how we're thinking about what does the future, what lies ahead for us in the future. The way that we talk about it at LinkedIn is that the future of work will be flexible and equitable. So we've spent some time really thinking about, the fact that, like, as a colleague at LinkedIn, so eloquently says, is like the genie's out of the bottle. So that means that, if there are leaders who really believed that, FaceTime mattered and, they didn't believe in remote work, that the genie's out of the bottle. We're able to see through, the last few months that we are able to be productive and, help the organization perform, being in a remote environment, and that when things do return, when we can safely return to work locations, there is going to be a shift in the dynamics between who's in the office and who's not in the office. So we recently announced that, in order to promote a more flexible work environment, that employees can work remotely up to 50% of the time without manager approval. We also shared, how, transparent guidelines around how employees who are interested in relocation, permanent moves, working remotely permanently, how they could do that through conversations with their managers and with their leaders. And then we're currently working on functional guidance around teaming and team agreements. So we're really excited about that body of work. We're also taking a holistic view with really trying to understand how do we make sure that we're looking after the LinkedIn culture, which matters a lot to us at LinkedIn, and we've relied in the past on in-person events, people seeing each other, eating with each other, being able to be in person to share information. And we're thinking about what that's going to look like in the future. So we're looking at, people and culture, technology and tools, as well as workspace, and just really trying to understand from a holistic perspective, how can we ensure that we are, that we're delivering a really great LinkedIn cultural experience in the future with a distributed workforce. So we're starting off with taking a deep dive at looking at all of our culture and values and trying to think through in the future, how do we look at people, culture, technology, tools, and workplace to ensure that we are promoting our culture and our values in a really intentional and explicit way through, rituals, information sharing, how we reward behaviors to make sure that we have a really good sense of maintaining our culture and driving a healthy culture in the future.
That's fantastic. We know from our research that culture is always evolving and changing, whether or not we want it to. And especially in times of major change, that can, the culture change itself can be accelerated. And actually, since COVID, we've seen that culture is actually becoming more important to employees than some of the more traditional drivers like career opportunities. So I just think it's really great that LinkedIn is being so intentional about how that culture evolves, really trying to try to influence that and shape that, and not, let it completely shape itself. So it's also really clear from all of these things that you shared that feedback from your employees has been really key in some of the decisions that and changes that you've made and that leadership has made. How would you describe the role of data in informing decisions at LinkedIn? And can you give us any other examples of something else that you and leadership have done as a result of people data?
Yeah. So in regards to the culture work that we're doing, we're using our Glint survey in order for us to measure culture and see how culture is evolving and how our employees are resonating with our values. So that's really critical for us to understand that data as we're thinking about how our culture is going to evolve in the future. In addition, I think another really important piece of what we saw during the pandemic is that we asked a question in our Glint survey around just a simple question like, how are you doing? And we received thousands of responses, just open text around how people were doing. That information was incredibly critical so that we could, parse through that and understand how do we need to communicate in a different way. Do we need to, which we did, provide our employees with a wellness day off? Do we need to, which we also did, provide our employees with a no meeting day, and really making sure that we are designing communications and programs, employee resources, looking at our benefits that's really designed to resonate and alleviate the concerns that our employees have during this time. So that data is critical, and it also informed us of another question that was really important for us to add, which is, do you feel well supported? So that we have this, constant feedback mechanism, or listening tool to ensure that our employees are feeling supported. That informs whether we needed to do a quick sprint and pivot to introduce an Ask Me Anything session, or take another look at our mental health offerings. So I feel that without having that data, you're just operating a little bit with one arm behind your back, and doing this sort of thing, just kind of hoping that what you design is going to really help employees, give them a sense of calm, a sense of stability, so that they're able to do their best work in the organization. So having that data is just absolutely critical, so that we could really understand that everything that we do is meaningful and that it resonates with our employees in a very positive way.
That's fantastic. I think one positive thing that I've seen across our customers, and I think LinkedIn was really early to jump on this, was, really kind of bringing this concept of well-being and, kind of starting to lean into mental health and saying, like, we have got to, and I actually think one of one of the executives at LinkedIn said, early on, like, we have got to keep an eye on well-being right now, and starting to ask that question, how are you doing? And letting employees talk about, how they're feeling and the pressures, and, really just making that part of the dialogue, not something that we have to sort of put away and pretend isn't happening at work, but actually bring that into the conversation, allow managers to talk to their teams about it. And then all of the incredible resources that LinkedIn has rolled out to support employees has been so powerful. And I hope that we remain focused on well-being for a long time. I think I think the world needs employers that are willing to talk about this stuff at work. So it's been nice to see. Another thing that we hear a lot from people leaders is that they're really focused on trying to build community, connection, belonging in a world where so many of us are outside of the office and not interacting face-to-face with our colleagues. I'd love to hear a little more about how you think about community, connection, and belonging, and how do you work with your team to create greater belonging among employees?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult thing to do right now. But I also believe that this is the moment, I'd like to think that 18 months from now, when we look back at this time, we see that this is a time that actually brought us together. That it's a moment that, although we're separated by physical location, that sort of emotionally and through just relationships that we're building, the deepest, most trusting relationships that we ever had. And I feel that way with my team, just because we're in uncharted waters. I think, most of us are. And there is something about creating connection when you're trying to work through really hard, challenging, complex issues together. It requires a high level of trust. It requires, those folks who are saying, what? Give it to me. I'll do it. I'll take it. It requires your team being able to say, hey, we'll have your back. If you fail, we're there. We're going to be there to catch you. Like, this is the time, I think, in a career where those sorts of behaviors are real. They're present because no one has a playbook for how to lead through an organization and how to inspire and motivate during a pandemic. And if they did write that book 100 years ago, right, no one can find it right now. So I think it's really about just being intentional about the moment that we're in, calling out that this is the time that we have to be high trust, that we have to create deep relationships, even though we can't, get together and share lunch together, or, maybe go out after work. that we are finding those moments, even when we're in meetings together, to really set aside that time to be present. So it's something that we do with our leadership team. Is every time that we're together, we set aside a good chunk of time just to be present, to be able to share, what's up for us personally. What are we doing during the pandemic to, sort of take care of ourselves? What are we binge watching? So that we could just really, bring that human element and connection. And I think as an organization, also through our all hands, through, I have an ongoing weekly communication that I send out to the organization, just making sure that it's personal, that we're sharing information that resonates to people, so that they're seen, they're heard, and that they feel that they're cared for. So I think that's our approach of how we've been able to really continue to foster belonging and care within the organization.
That's fantastic. It's such a good point to, one of the qualities of high performing teams is that's very stands out amongst other drivers of high performing teams is that you have goals and objectives that are bigger than what any one person can achieve. So that really kind of brings people together to say, I can't do this alone. I have to figure out a way to work together. And gosh, if these times are not big, hairy, audacious goals, and I don't know what is. It's a really good point about the fact that we can actually connect on a challenge at a level that we have not often seen before, and that can actually in itself drive connection. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Twyla. Well, I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I really appreciate you sharing how you're thinking about so many hot topics that I know our audience is thinking about in the new world of work, well-being. We've talked about a lot, flexibility, culture, fostering community. I could keep going, but I wanted to make sure our audience has a chance to ask some questions as well. So I want to go ahead and dive right in there. All right, it looks like we've got a question here from Yuko. So how have you addressed fostering an innovative and collaborative environment with remote employees? Similarly, have you thought about psychological safety in a virtual setting?
Yeah, that's great. I think what's really interesting about this remote environment from an innovation perspective is, I think that when and speaking for myself, when I was in a physical location, there were certain people that I saw every day because they were, sort of on my way to my office, and out and from my office out, and there were just, kind of the same people that I saw every day that I was able to, stop by and ask about their family and, sort of check out what, photos were that they had, on their desk. One thing that I find that's really interesting in the remote world is that we don't have those, if you want to call it a barrier anymore. That we have access to a whole lot of different people. And if we think about it from that perspective, like, who in the organization did I not connect with, that I didn't have, an opportunity to share an idea in the break room, because you're pretty much sharing ideas in the break room with the people who just happen to sit next to you, so that your physical location actually could be limiting in terms of innovation and ideation. And so there's an opportunity for us now to take advantage of the fact that, maybe by time zones or by geography, you have those limitations, but that you're being really intentional with connecting with people that you haven't connected with before, which would have been very difficult if you were in different office locations or different buildings or on different floors. So I think just a shift in mindset around who are you connecting with, like who's your network of people that you're connecting with every day, taking a look at that, or looking at your calendar at the end of the week and thinking through, how do you expand that and just take advantage of the fact that we have access to a lot of different people in the remote environment. I think just that simple shift will expose you to more people with diverse ideas, diverse backgrounds, which will lead to innovation. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Let's see. Have you thought about psychological safety in a virtual setting?
Yeah, and so we had a global leadership summit here at LinkedIn a few months ago, and we had a session on psychological safety. And so that was really important for all of our leaders in the organization to really, hear about psychological safety, understand how to provide that, and then to take that back to our teams. And I think it's a little bit more challenging being able to read body language and understand if people feel like they can speak out, bring their best selves to work in a remote environment. I think that is one of the challenges with being on, in the virtual environment. It's those subtle cues that you can't quite pick up on. So I think having more, figuring out how managers could have more one-on-one time with employees, and not sort of assessing how employees show up when you're in group meetings, but spending that one-on-one time to ensure that employees feel like they can participate, they can butt in, they're raising their hands, they feel like they can contribute into meetings, and that they have the environment that they need to thrive is really critically important at this time, because I think we're all sort of at a disadvantage with being able to pick up on subtle cues that we had in the physical, when we were together in a physical location.
Yeah, that's great. I'll say one thing too that's been surprising for me that I think has helped with psychological safety and inclusion as well is, having like the chat feature within Zoom and poll features. I've really started with my team to start to ask questions and say, okay, everybody first, before anyone chimes in, answer in the chat. And you kind of have a little bit of technology almost gives you like a little bit of a way to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak up. Whereas, sometimes the loudest voice is the one that gets the most airtime. And it's kind of one of those, those bonuses that I didn't quite realize, just becoming really present about the fact that if dominant voices take over in an in-person setting, it's almost exacerbated on virtual meetings. And so how do we use that technology to give everybody a chance to chime in?
I love that, Amy. I'm writing that down because I
sometimes forget, but yeah, it does. It's really helpful. It's really helpful. And there's just sometimes so many great ideas that come in, and then you can have the conversation, but it gives everybody a chance. Okay, let's see here. Lots of great questions coming in. So let's see. What advice this is from Jesse. What advice do you have to people starting out in employee engagement or looking to get more involved in engagement at their company?
What a great place that you're in. I think, the future of HR is definitely around understanding how to engage, motivate employees, particularly as we move to a more distributed hybrid work environment. So I think, first of all, congratulations. I think you're in a really good spot to have a very robust future in the HR space. I would say analytics, being able to get your arms around data, understanding what the trends are, understanding how do you identify those key patterns for high engagement and figure out how to replicate that. And then, I think that, people leaders, there's a shift going on right now that the pandemic provided us. I think there's just a new role for people who are in human resources or people who are in, particularly employee engagement. There's just this new role because I think, what we had to rely on in the past, where we're able to walk by and see people and, use other, human ways of determining whether we can inspire and motivate people, all of that has gone away. So I think the more that you're helping leaders look around the corner with data and providing those insights and being able to, really lift up what a profile of success looks like among the highly engaged group in your organization. It's just, going deeper in that area is going to be just a huge value to all organizations as we design for the future.
That's awesome. Great. Okay, one final question I want to squeeze in because I love it so much. This one comes from Taylor. So across the things you've seen as well as that you've heard from your peers, what are some of the workplace trends you're seeing that inspire you or give you hope?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for that, Taylor. I think, one thing that is really fascinating right now is the just creativity in the DIB space, in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. I think we're seeing, in the past, it's been very US centric topic, and a little slower around global organizations and international workforces to understand the value of diversity and inclusion and belonging programs. And I'm just seeing more global organizations really step into this, really sort of learn from what we've done, here in the United States and other organizations, and figure out where they have pockets of exclusion in their countries and doing things. I just think there's a lot of innovation and people doing a lot of different cool things to really try to positively disrupt and put some meaningful energy and action in the diversity space. And so what I'm thinking about right now, it's really turning on its head pipelining activities, really turning on its head. How do you get to pockets of underrepresented groups and engage them in a different way by really focusing on skills as opposed to pedigree or where somebody went to school, to really just disrupt how we think about bringing talent into the organization in very non-traditional ways. So I think, what we're seeing in the skill space is directly correlated to what we're going to see sort of unlock in the diversity space right now. So it's super exciting to see.
That's awesome. And it feels like it's here to stay. This is not a short-term focus. That's wonderful. Twyla, we are out of time. It was so wonderful to get to chat with you today and learn from you today. I really want to thank you for joining us and sharing so openly your own experience personally as well as at LinkedIn. Thanks for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Amy. It was my pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today for this fireside chat. I will now pass it back to Katie, who will let us know what to expect next.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you so much, Amy and Twyla, for that great conversation. What a great note to end on for our first session. So before we kick it off into a little break, I want to introduce you to our next people-driven leader. Yesterday, I introduced this concept as the kind of missing link, the elusive link, if you will, that really drives our people success efforts. And the next people-driven leader I'm going to introduce you to is Joan Burke, who's the Chief People Officer at DocuSign, a longtime customer of Flint and a longtime friend of mine. And I think she's an inspiration to all of us. So we will kick it off into that video and we'll meet back here at the top of the hour to talk about implementing change. See you then.
I'm really excited to be here today with Joan Burke, the Chief People Officer at DocuSign, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last several years. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure, too.
At DocuSign, you've built this really amazing culture. I'd love if you could spend a little bit of time talking about the culture at DocuSign and the philosophy that went into creating it.
Sure. So one of the things that was important to us was to articulate what it was that we thought was special about DocuSign and is a differentiator from other organizations. We wanted to create a culture at DocuSign where people would come there to do the work of their lives. If I'm your manager, my role is to be able to understand what does it mean for you, and then how can I help support you, and how can the company develop the kinds of opportunities and the kinds of programs that is going to have you say, when you hang it up and you're looking back at your career, DocuSign was a place I did the work of my life.
And how did you go about creating that very special culture?
So when I joined DocuSign, we were growing so fast that we did what a lot of companies do, which is put people in management role, and then it was kind of sink or swim.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time, and we're investing heavily in developing managers so they understand what their role is in creating that.
Managers really are the change agents.
Managers are absolute. In fact, we have a saying at DocuSign, it's that every employee deserves to work for a great manager, and every manager deserves the time and resources to become great.
Tell me a little bit about you as a leader.
There are a couple of really powerful things, in my opinion, about being a strong leader. One is being authentic. I had worked for an organization, and my job was to be with the executives and understand who the high potential talent was, and then create the opportunities for them to be successful. It was a great job. But I had it for a number of years. I was never promoted to be a VP. One of the executives who I did a lot of work with said to me, he said, "Why do you think you had never been promoted to a VP?" And I kind of gave all the typical answers. I said, "Well, it's probably because I didn't do this good enough. I didn't work hard enough here, you know." And he shook his head and he said, "No." He said, "That's not it at all." He said, "I don't care about your sexual orientation, but there are people inside this company who do. And one of them's your boss." People, when I tell that story, oftentimes ask, "Were you mad?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I was not mad. I was freed." That was a gift because it basically said it had nothing to do with how I was showing up, and it had everything to do with other people's perceptions and homophobia, whatever it is, but it was not about Joan.
Wow.
So that changed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. How have you attempted to build more inclusive, more diverse cultures where people feel they belong at DocuSign?
So first, let me just say that the inclusive part of that word is so important, because I remember the first stages of the diversity movement back 20 or so years ago, when chief diversity officers were being hired by large organizations, well-intended, you know, to bring in more women and more underrepresented minorities, but those efforts actually failed in many cases because we didn't know that the inclusion part was so important. And so people would come to the organization but just didn't feel like they belonged, and they weren't successful and they left. So the good thing about, I think, where we are now around diversity and inclusion is we understand that inclusion is every bit as important as the diversity. In fact, we have to have cultures where people feel like they're valued, and where people see people like them.
I know you've got some philosophies about mentoring. Could you share a little bit about what should people look for when they think about mentoring?
One of the things that we do at DocuSign is we have a mentoring program where we call 5 Cups of Coffee. And what we do is we encourage people to identify 5 people in the company that they want to have a cup of coffee with. And they want to have a cup of coffee with because they want to talk to them about that thing that they see them do well. And while it might be overwhelming for someone to say, "Would you be my mentor?" You know, it's not overwhelming when you say, if somebody said to me, "Joan, could you have a cup of coffee with me maybe next week? I really want to hear about how you make presentations, because I've seen you do and I think you do that really well."
Well, you know I'm super passionate about happiness at work, so what's one thing that you do to be happier at work?
The opportunity to be able to sort of engage one-on-one with employees inside the company is the thing that at the end of the day makes me most happy. If I look at my calendar and I see on it that I've got 1 or 2 meetings with an employee that day, it's like, this is going to be a great day. You know, it's as opposed to just sort of being heads down working on a project. So it's kind of what has fueled me my whole career, and it's the reason why human resources has been the right place for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Joan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I really enjoyed our conversation.